permission to record?
I'm not sure if it's muted or not. Sounds muted. Go. Hello, my name is Lance Belroll, and happy to see you guys again. I'll be starting the first point of error right here soon. All right. So Lee Harvey Oswald was not guilty. Let's go into this. So I would like to go into the 3 points of error I have here, Your Honors. Good morning, Mr. Chief Justice and Associate Justices, and may it please the Court. I, Lance Belroll, along with my co-counsel, Madison Adelstein, will be representing Lee Harvey Oswald in this case before you today. So on Friday, November 22nd, 1963, about 12:30 p.m., shots were fired at the president, in which 3 people were hit and President Kennedy died. 2 days later, on Sunday, November 25th, 1963, Lee Harvey Oswald was killed. So let's look at the 3 points of error we'll be introducing, in which 1, all investigation was based on 1 alleged murderer, and the investigation was based on the presumption of guilt. 2, evidence was ignored, in which the witnesses had mysterious deaths, and some evidence was even changed. And finally, 3, the cover-up began immediately, making it a pre-planned part of the original plot. So if we stop right here, we would satisfy all 5 of these things, which we would satisfy the Warren Commission report. We would satisfy the media of that day. We would have satisfied the police investigations. And we would have satisfied the FBI investigation. And finally, we would have satisfied the Secret Service investigation. But we would not actually, Your Honors, because if we go further than that, we have to, oh, sorry about that. It's kind of laggy today. All right. So no one knew what was going to happen on that day, right? That's the presumption that we have here, Your Honors. But did they really not know what was going to happen? Because we have this video right here of which the police chief Curry actually knew 2 days before the visit. I will be skipping all videos for now in order to make this thing as short as we can. And also going into the first point of error, in which all investigation was based on 1 alleged murderer, and the investigation was based on the presumption of guilt. So Lee Harvey Oswald, from almost 12:30 p.m. on November 22nd, 1963, was not the only prime suspect. He was the only suspect in this case, because information was used by the press to manipulate the narrative to give the public the only logical conclusion that Oswald was guilty. So the only evidence that fit into this narrative was used. Real investigation actually investigates to obtain the criminal and not the criminal to get the crime, Your Honors. So immediately we begin shifting the burden here, because when a person or group of people try to switch either blame from one place and place it on another, this becomes proof that you have a theory before the event. In other words, you actually know what was going to happen. So the people who were in on the conspiracy that day knew what was going to happen based on this kind of logic, Your Honor. So the best evidence of this shifting is actually this Dallas Morning News reporter, in which the witness Mary Woodward said that the shots came from behind her. The grassy knoll Secret Service stopped, in which the bullets were from behind, Your Honors. So immediately pressure was put on this paper to change the story, because the DMN was a morning paper. Mary's account was not circulated until the next day, November 23rd, appearing on page 3 of section 1 on the right-hand side, below of a large photo of the alleged assassin's view of Elm Street from the 6th floor window of the Texas School Book Depository. On the left side of the page were photos of the sniper's nest and the entire building, with an article entitled "Kennedy Killer Hid in the Area Used Little" in the bottom left corner, accompanied by a floor plan showing the assassin's hideout. So these 2 articles prove that 1, the Zapruder film was fake, 2, shots came from the back, 3, the media was still almost 30 years after the fact trying to get the public to buy their story, 4, the pressure on the witnesses, and finally 5, there was a conspiracy that started before the shooting, which went through the cover-up and continues today, Your Honor. So on August 17, 1980, Dallas Times Herald explanation of the article, despite her assertion that gunfire appeared to be coming from her right, 2 Dallas reporters decided in 1980 that the whole matter was simply a mistake on Miss Woodward's part. So the same article concluded that this conclusion is contained in an article published on August 17, 1980, defending the Warren report's conclusions. So with no evidence that they actually spoke to Miss Woodward or the others, Doug Bedell and Hugh Ainsworth of the now defunct Dallas Times-Herald provided their own explanations, of which I quote, "The origins of the so-called grassy knoll theory of a second gunman can be traced to the simple mistake of a Dallas Morning News reporter out for lunch with her cohorts to watch the motorcade." So when Kennedy was shot, she raced back to the office to file a tearful, horrified account of what she had seen. "Gunfire," she wrote, "came over her right shoulder. That way she was facing, that would mean that the shots would have come from the knoll. And when her friends saw the story, they rushed in to correct her. The story was corrected for later editions. In spite of affidavits to the contrary, attorney Mark Lane used the woman's uncorrected account of the shooting to bolster his assertion that another gunman was involved." So we will show that the Attorney General's office informed the Warren Commissions immediately on what to do. The FBI informed the President Johnson what to do. The press informed the people what to do. And this took coordination and pre-planning before it even took place. And the cover-up continues with misinformation today, Your Honors. And this from Katzenbach in AG office, if you read the memorandum, in which it actually says that the public must be satisfied that Oswald was the assassin, that he did not have Confederates who are still at large, and that the evidence was such that he would have been convicted at trial. So speculation about Oswald's motivation ought to be cut off, and we should have some basis for rebutting the thought that this was a communist conspiracy, or, as the Iron Curtain press saying, a right-wing conspiracy to blame it on the communists. Unfortunately, the facts on Oswald seem about too obvious. The Dallas police have put out statements on the communist conspiracy theory, and it was that they were who were in charge when he was shot and thus silenced. So this is an important aspect we should look at. In any investigation, you must establish a motive. So let's look at Oswald's motive for wanting to kill President Kennedy. Why did he want to kill Kennedy? Note that with this memo, the Assistant Attorney General of the United States is calling for the commission to cut off the questionings of the motive. But we must all ask, why do they want to cut off the motive of Oswald wanting to kill Kennedy? Why do they want to cut this motive off? So I think you can await publication of the FBI report and public reaction to it here and abroad. I think, however, that a statement that all the facts will be made public property in an orderly and responsible way should be made now. We need something to head off public speculation or congressional hearings of the wrong sort, Your Honor. So here are the questions posed we have now. If the investigation was a real one, would you need to come up with a conclusion first before you investigate? This memo clearly explains that the Warren Commission was never intended to investigate the JFK murder, just rubber stamp the JFK FBI report. Does this sound like what the government should be doing at all? So the cover-up begins with the motive. If you take out the questions about motive, you may be able to spoon-feed the public the information you want them to know, so you can get your predetermined conclusion and cover up the people who actually did the crime. So this based the investigation on presumption of guilt, Your Honor, in which the extensive plan proves that it was not a lone assassin. The extensive media campaign points out the fact that Oswald investigation began as not an investigation under the presumption of innocence, but a presumption of guilt. So in Oswald's case, the presumption of innocence was never there, because instead what it should have been was this, the investigation of assassination of President John F. Kennedy, and not just rubber stamping the whole thing. So FBI Hoover to President LBJ, November 29, 1963, in which this testimony has very peculiar conversation. So President Johnson asked, how many shots were fired? And then Hoover replied, 3. And then he further went to say, any of them fired at me? So Hoover said, no, all 3 at the president, and we have them. 2 shots were splintered, but our ballistic expert was able to prove that they were fired by this gun. So please note on this testimony, only 2 bullet casings that have been found were sent to DC on Friday. Another bent casing was later sent that next Monday. The bent casing from a safety plug was not a casing with a bullet. And what you can see with this testimony is not the beginnings of the story. 3 shots from the rifle shot by a lone nut assassin. What do you not see is the motive, the opportunity, and the actual physical evidence here, Your Honor. So to convict people in court, what you need is intent. What was Oswald's intent in committing this crime? What, if anything, did he have to gain? What, if any benefits, did anyone else have to commit the crime? You must prove that he is guilty in court for all these things, Your Honor. But the burden of proof, right? In the United States, a person is presumed innocent until proven guilty, because the burden of proof is on prosecution in criminal court cases. If there is a reasonable doubt that the defendant committed a crime, then jurors are instructed to vote not guilty. Only 50% of trials lead to conviction or defendant, and only 25% of trials lead defendant serving a year or more in jail/prison. Because, however, in Oswald's case, he was presumed guilty, like we've established before, Your Honor. And if we take this further, this step was missing on purpose, but why? Why was it missing on purpose? So instead of a true investigation, fake evidence was used to persuade, like this picture, for example. So Oswald's backyard photo, as you can see here, is very peculiar if you look at all these three photos compared side by side, Your Honors, because the difference is in pictures, right? After the police arrested Lee Harvey Oswald for killing President Kennedy, they searched Ruth Paine's home and found a picture of him standing in the backyard. In one hand, he held a rifle, and the other copies of two communist newspapers, The Militant and The Worker. His wife Marina said she had taken the photo in the spring of 1963. So this photo was made public in late February 1964, simultaneously appearing on the cover of Life magazine and on the front page of the Detroit Free Press. Within days, it had appeared in many other publications, but sharp-eyed observers noticed that the photo appeared to have been tampered with since details differed from the publication to publication. In particular, details of the rifle differed. For instance, in the version that appeared on the cover of Life, Oswald's rifle had a sniper scope, but in the version that ran in the Detroit Free Press, the sniper scope was gone. So Oswald put on a fake body. You can see here, if you look at the chin, and you can see the difference, the very clear cut you have in this picture here. So this one photo actually proves that Oswald was innocent, Your Honor. On November 22nd, 1963, the police found several incriminating photos of Oswald posing with the Mannlicher Carcano rifle and a pistol. When the police showed that the pictures of Oswald, he said, "That is not a picture of me, it was my face, but my face has been superimposed. The rest of it is not the picture. The rest of the picture is not me at all, and I've never seen it before." So the problems with this picture point out to these 7 things, in which Marina Oswald testified to the Warren Commission that she took the photos on March 31, 1963. So the photos show a bright sunny day. The bush beside Oswald is in bloom, but in March, such bushes have not yet begun to bloom. So Oswald's head is erect and a nose casts a V-shaped shadow. In another photo, Oswald's head is slightly cocked, yet the shadow remains the same. The posture of the man is also oddly out of kilter. When one attempts to stand at such an angle, one invariably falls over. So the size of the bodies in both pictures differs. The chin of Oswald in the photos seem more broader and squarish than the Oswald who was arrested in Dallas, and the weapon Oswald carries was not the one discovered in the TSPD, Your Honor. So again, we have to look at the cut of the chin. You can clearly see below that the chin is a cut and paste job, Your Honor. So the shadow is merely added in too, 100% fake, and even the hand is phony, cut and added onto the right arm, in which the arm is a cut and paste object. So how many people knew about the Paine house in Irving before 22nd? Well, only these 2 people, the FBI and the Dallas police. So the FBI meeting with Ruth Paine on 31st October 1963, an FBI agent, James Hosty, visited Paine's home to discover where Oswald was living. He spoke to both Paine and Marina Oswald about Lee Harvey Oswald. So when Oswald heard about the visit when he went to the FBI office in Dallas, he went told that Hosty was at lunch. They left him a message in an envelope. So President Kennedy is shot at 12:30. Here's the time when we start to establish here, Your Honors. Which one? JFK is pronounced dead at 1. 2, Officer Tippit is shot dead 1:06 to 15. 3, JFK is announced dead at 1:33. 4, Oswald is arrested in the Texas Theater at 1:40. 5, Oswald in Captain Fritz's office 2:20. And finally 6, the Paine home is searched at 3:30. So this is what Police Chief Curry was talking about here, Your Honor. Again, we won't be showing the videos as we want to make this as short as possible. So is it unusual to go by a person's house by just their name? One of Oswald's arresting officers, Gerald Hill, in which he quotes, "We were trying to get together to decide who was going to make the offense report and get all the little technicalities out of the way when a detective named Richard Stovall and another one, G.F. Rose, came up, and the 4 of us were standing when Captain Fritz walked in." So he walked up to Rose and Stovall and made the statement to them, "Go get a search warrant and go get to some address on 5th Street, and I don't recall the actual street number in Irving, and pick up a man named Lee Harvey Oswald." So, and I asked the captain why he wanted him, and he said, well, he was employed down at the book depository, and he had not been present for a roll call of the employees. And we said, "Captain, we will save you a trip," or to the words of that effect, because there he sits. And with that, he relinquished our prisoner to the Homicide and Robbery Bureau to Captain Fritz. So finally, Detective Guy Rose says, "Mr. Rose, in just a few minutes, Captain Fritz came in, and he instructed me to get 2 men and go to Irving to the Ruth Paine home. So I went immediately." So the November 23rd newspaper story mentions that the backyard photos. This actually proves that Michael Paine claimed the photographs were taken from his home from the day before, right? So where did the police say they got these pictures again? They said they got it from Ruth Paine's garage. The police arrived at the Payne residence at November 22nd, 1963 at 2:30, and the strange facts about the first search of November 22nd, in which Captain Fritz tells the officers to go to Ruth Payne's house. He asked by name, not address. The Dallas PD does not have jurisdiction in Irving in the first place, so Irving PD or the Dallas County Sheriff Department would have had jurisdiction. So why would you search a house that you already knew about in a city that wasn't yours, unless they were a part of the conspiracy as well, Your Honor? In which Michael Payne's statements in the photos, he said his testimony in 1964 only acknowledges seeing a backyard photo at the DPD headquarters on the night of the assassination. So now the problem begins here, Your Honors. The police arrest Oswald at 1:40 for killing President Kennedy, but do not have any evidence at all linking him to the crime. As we've said before, an investigation needs to be a true investigation and not just pin Oswald as the one who did the crime. So no problem. The police go to Ruth Payne's house and get the information they need to tie the two together. So we have something peculiar going on here. They don't have any evidence for convicting Oswald, and they just go to some Ruth Payne's house. And they even say this during that investigation, which, come in, we've been expecting you. That's very odd, isn't it? Because if you look at that, that's clearly an admission of conspiracy we have there, Your Honors, because they can't give or grant rights to search other people's materials. They can't volunteer or give away of people's materials. And this was done before Oswald was interrogated by a police department without jurisdiction. So we have very odd things going on here. They don't have jurisdiction. They can't even give permission. And now how the police search Oswald's things, they actually got the search warrant after they got Oswald's things. So this is Rose's statements on the November 22nd, in which it was a search of Payne's home, as you can see here, Your Honors, and Ruth Payne's testimony, in which these very things were said. The police arrived in what occurred, and then Mrs. Payne says, I went to the door. They announced themselves as both sheriffs from the sheriff's office and the Dallas police office, showed me at least one package or two. And then I was very surprised. Did you say anything? I said nothing. I think I just dropped my jaw. And the man in front of, by the way of the explanation, we have Lee Oswald in custody. He is charged with shooting an officer. This is the first I had any idea that Lee might be in trouble with the police or any way involved in the day's events. So I asked them to come in, and they said they wanted to search the house. I asked if they had a warrant. They said they didn't. They said they could get the sheriff out here right away with one if I insisted. I said no, that was all right. They could be my guest, and then they did search the house. Nothing was ever said to give permission or consent about searching Oswald's possessions here, Your Honor, because the Warren Commission testimony in which Detective Rose, the 1122 Payne house, you can see that even Miss Marina's Oswald statement on the search, she couldn't even speak English. So it's very odd that we have a perfectly grammatical correct affidavit here for her when she couldn't even speak English. How can someone who didn't speak English write something so perfect in an affidavit? This just proves that this was a setup, Your Honor, a conspiracy, in which, note the police report, here police detectives get permission from Miss Ruth Payne to search her house. Does she have the right to give permission to search Oswald's personal materials? No, she doesn't have that right because this was the law of the land back then. In Chapman v. United States, the court ruled that the landlord's consent is insufficient to search the personal items or belongings. Oh, sorry about that. Hold on. All right. Searching, confinement. Ooh, sorry about that. All right. So we were at Ruth Payne's garage in a testimony, and here I would like to begin here, Your Honor. In fact, Oswald is arrested before the evidence is checked out in the first place. So at 1:33 p.m. at Parkland Hospital, acting White House Press Secretary Malcolm Kilduff makes the official announcement of President Kennedy's death to reporters gathered in nurses' classroom at the hospital, in which they quote, President John F. Kennedy died at approximately 1 CST today here in Dallas. He died of a gunshot wound to the brain, and I have no other details regarding the assassination of the president. So Oswald was arrested for these three things, right? Without direct evidence tying him to a crime, without a direct witness placing him committing a crime, and without an autopsy or investigation on what caused JFK's death or the direction of the bullets. So the police go back and go get a search warrant in the next day to check this one car garage and house again, Your Honors. So the unwarranted search actually proves the cover-up. The reason why they went there without a search warrant was because in order to obtain a search warrant, the requester had to explain to the court specifically what it is he was looking for. Since they didn't know what they were looking for, they couldn't apply for a search warrant. So they had an unwarranted search, and it was Very peculiar there. So now look at the search warrant here for November 23rd. They obviously gathered the things, and they've got the search warrant after they had the unwarranted search. So the search warrant obtained by Judge Joe Brown Jr., in which it says the evidence to obtain the search warrant was obtained itself through an illegal search of the house the day before. And Judge Brown should not have issued this warrant at all, because Judge Brown's father will be the judge in the Jack Ruby case. So Judge Brown issues more search warrants on Ruby, Your Honor. So the search warrant issued was on the basis of illegally obtained information. There is no basis for the first illegal search, no basis for the search warrant, and no basis for Lee Harvey Oswald's arrest at 1:40 p.m. on November 22nd, 1963 for the murder of the president. Now compare the facts with Detective Rose's statements. Note the following. 1. He spent 2 hours labeling the evidence from the day before. 2. The backyard picture was used by Dallas police Friday evening. It was not discovered on Saturday. And finally, 3. The police report is based on facts, not in evidence. So here's his actual statements if you want to take a look at it. But here's JFK announced dead at 1:33 p.m., 7 minutes later, in which Oswald was arrested for the murder of JFK at 1:40. As you can see here, clearly without evidence too. So events or conclusions in the Warren Commission prove conspiracy, Your Honor. So let's look at the events and conclusions. 1. Pictures forged or faked previously to their finding with planted evidence that was tampered with. 2. Pictures and information obtained without a warrant and illegal to use in the first place. And finally, 3. Arrest warrant filed out 7 minutes after the official word was announced and before any evidence was obtained, Your Honor. So the police claims it was an open and shut case. It was very peculiar because we do not have a witness who saw him shoot the rifle. So clearly the case against Oswald could not hold in court because the powers to be this case way to make the public believe a person was guilty. Chief of Police Dallas Jesse Curry later said this too, in which, however, in November 22 to 23rd, 1963, this was said about Oswald, in which Jesse Curry said before all these things actually went on, Your Honors. Even D.A. Henry's Wade comments on Friday night, November 22nd, the NBC TV broadcast a press interview with District Attorney Henry Wade, whose comments included these. I figured we have sufficient evidence to convict him. Oswald, of course, and there's no one else but him. Because they never tried to search for another person involved in the assassination because they just assumed that Oswald was the killer. But did they really assume, or did they just want to frame it in the first place? So listen to District Attorney Henry Wade. This was taken on Friday, November 22nd, 1963. How can you arrest someone 7 minutes without proper legal techniques and without proving that the person actually committed a crime first? Are you not innocent until proven guilty, Your Honor? Because Henry Wade's own words, and sorry, we'll be showing that video, and also Jerry Curry's statements on the evidence, we don't have any proof that Oswald fired the rifle, and never did. Nobody's yet been able to put him in that building with a gun in his hand. And the evidence, the fingerprints, anyone? There's no fingerprints on the rifle in the first place. And Oswald was presumed to have killed JFK in the court of public opinion, Your Honor. So now, note the homicide report, date 11/23/63, 5:10 p.m., Oswald fingered despite no evidence. So the newspaper and magazine reports this to be true without proving it at all, without evidence. The backyard front page forged picture illegally obtained convicts Oswald in the court of public opinion, and as well as headlines like this, Your Honor. So stories appear immediately for afternoon newspaper. The president is assassinated as Dallas multitude hails him, and before LBJ gets sworn in, Oswald is caught. So public reports of the time, 2 days after the assassination, the New York Times ran a banner headline that read in part, "Police say prisoner is the assassin," with a smaller but likewise front page heading, "Evidence against Oswald described as conclusive." The article quoted Captain Will Fritz of the Dallas Police Homicide Bureau as having said, "We're convinced beyond any doubt that he killed the president. I think the case is cinched." So plus these quotes, Your Honor, the Philadelphia Inquirer reported, police on Saturday said they have an airtight case against pro-Castro Marxist Lee Harvey Oswald as the assassin of the president. So another one. On the front page of the St. Louis Post-Dispatch was the headline, "Dallas Police Insisted Evidence Proves Oswald Kennedy." You have this repeating theme here, Your Honor, of which they keep saying that there is evidence against him, when really they just do this to frame Oswald in the first place. They have no evidence. Any evidence that was used was illegally obtained, so they don't have anything to go on, which means it's just a conspiracy, Your Honor. The press had to either been manipulated or on it since the very beginning, and the police had to be in or on it from the very beginning or manipulated. Oswald was never going to receive a trial from the beginning, which would prove that Oswald was not only the assassin, but that the police were in on it, Your Honor. Now we go to the second point of her. The witnesses see things that report fails to mention. Much of the eyewitness reports that went contrary to the conclusion was either not looked at or failed to be considered in the first place. So eyewitnesses of what they saw, right? The commission's crew of witness consisted of Howard Brennan and Amos Hewins, both of whom they said they saw the man fire a rifle. Robert Jackson and Malcolm Couch, the two photographers riding in the motorcade, who saw the barrel of the rifle being drawn slowly back at the window after the shots, in which Mrs. Earl Campbell, wife of the city mayor, who's also riding a procession, saw a projection from a depository window. And James Crawford, who saw a movement in the window after the shots, but could not say for sure whether it was a person whom he had seen. Two additional witnesses are added in the report's chapter, The Assassin, in which they are Ronald Fisher and Robert Edwards, both of whom saw a man without a rifle in the window shortly before the motorcade arrived. So what does this say? Public opinion has Oswald on the sixth floor in the sniper's nest. Yes, of course, but the eyewitnesses were not used, so the story doesn't fit at all, Your Honor. Two other sixth floor gunman witnesses didn't make quite into the relevant section of the report. One, in fact, never made the report at all. Arnold Rowland saw the gunman 15 minutes before the motorcade arrived at the plaza. However, at this time, the man was in that far southwest left window, and Rowland told the commission that another man was occupied in the southeast corner right window. The commission, whose legal eminencies knew that the other man was on the sixth floor at this time, satisfied the legal definition of a conspiracy, sought only to discredit Rowland, rejecting his story and under a section entitled, in which encompasses at the scene of the assassination. Miss Carolyn Walther saw the gunman in the right window shortly before the procession arrived. However, she too saw a second man on the sixth floor, although the accomplice she described was obviously different from Rowland's. So Rowland sprang his information on the commission by surprise. None of the various reports of him had ever mentioned the second man, and Mrs. Walther told the second man from the beginning that was totally ignored by the commission, Your Honors. So the timeline doesn't fit at all on the sixth floor at 12:30 p.m. The only way they could get Oswald down to the second floor was by artificially clicking his descent and slowing up the two witnesses' ascent here, Your Honor. And Oswald could not have been in two places at once. So this actually solves the conspiracy. It solves the mystery, Your Honor. So if he could not be in two places, obviously a cover-up is going on, but we've already established that. We have to go further than just that, Your Honor. So if we look into Brennan's testimony on November 22nd, 1963, Brennan was unable to identify Oswald as the man he saw in the window, but picked Oswald as the person in a police lineup who bore the closest resemblance to the gunman. Months later, when he appeared before the commission, Brennan said he could not have made a positive identification at the identification parade, Your Honors. Which now we go to the third point of error. Contradictory evidence was excluded from the whole thing. So the problem is that JFK was hit from the front and the back, Your Honor. The shots came from the front, as you can see from the data here. This is where people think where it came from. So if Oswald is in the front of the school book depository when JFK passes, then he could have not fired the bullets from Kennedy. Now the shots from the front became very important at this instance because newly released document proves frontal shot, Your Honor. So you can see here, you can see that's actually probably that frontal shot I've been talking about. And even the blood spray was faked on film, as you can see from this frame here, Your Honor. And even the blood spray in the limo, it fits with the frontal shot. So the JFK limo was even clean at Parkland. That's tampering of evidence. They should have not have done that. And that, like I've said before, tampering with evidence, very illegal. They probably have some conspiracy. Because the only way a crime scene is clean is, one, the blood spray doesn't fit with the narrative. Two, the Secret Service aren't working with cover-up. And finally, three, Oswald would have nothing to do with it at all. And this proves that he was innocent, Your Honor. So this is the claim here now that we have. Oswald was on the sixth floor and shot the president. So if JFK got shot from both the back and the front, Oswald could not have done it because that would be impossible from just one window. How could a gunshot shoot from the front or the back? We've already established that. So this photo proves that Oswald was not on the sixth floor at all. Because Carolyn Arnold testified that Oswald was on the first floor at 12:25. Oswald was shown to be in the doorway when JFK passed by. He could have not have been on the sixth floor at all, and he was seen 90 seconds later in the lunchroom. So again, we have these very peculiar things going on, which is really impossible to fit together in the narrative of the Warren Commission. So within 90 seconds, Lee is drinking a Dr. Pepper in the second floor lunchroom and meets Officer Baker. And Oswald did not do it. This proves it was a conspiracy. Even a British reporter from Cambridge News even received a phone call just 25 minutes before Kennedy was shot and was instructed to call the American embassy in London for some big news before the anonymous tipster hung up, according to an FBI document. After the reporter learned of the assassination, he informed local police about the call, who passed information along to the MI5, Britain's domestic security agency. So MI5 informed the FBI of the call and described of the Cambridge News reporter as a sound and loyal person with no security record. So the claim now that we have here is Oswald hated Kennedy. So Oswald hated Kennedy, that's a very weird thing to say because he praised JFK at a public meeting. On October 25, 1963, Oswald accompanies Michael Paine to the American Civil Liberties Union meeting at which he praises Kennedy for his civil works. So this would infer that even in Soviet Russia, when he had no fear of mercy and he gained admirers for denouncing Kennedy, Oswald never verifiably did in the first place. So Oswald got the job at the TSPD to kill JFK, right? This would be a very weird thing to put into narrative, but it would be very right because he could not have known what would happen when he got the job in the first place, Your Honor. But Oswald could not have been the lone assassin because he would not have the route in the first place. Unless Oswald had aid or instruction, he was unaware of a future presidential motorcade route. As officials claim he was acting by himself, he could not have known until November 19 of this opportunity in Dealey Plaza. The Dallas media did not carry the story with the full route until November 19 at the earliest. The implication of this fact has escaped prior to investigation. If the official timeline is accurate, Oswald has little time to do everything alone in the first place. So here are the questions. The two concepts that Lee Harvey Oswald was doing this alone, right? Taken out by the idea that the two Dallas papers had published two different routes, one on Main Street all the way, and one where they turned down on Houston and then left to Elm. These are the two routes we show here now, Your Honor. This one and the other one on the 21st. So the Dallas Morning News even had one of the routes there on the 22nd, and this is the timeline of which Oswald activity from November 19th to 22nd. We can go here, as you can see, and now we have a summary of Oswald's timeline. So he took the trip announced on September 13, 1963, right? The dates announced on November 4th, 1963, in which the route was announced on December 18th. The route changed on December 19th and published in the newspapers. Oswald didn't have enough time to plan by himself, so Oswald could not have known by himself that the TSPD would be on that route in the first place. There must have been something going on in here, Your Honor. So now we have another claim. Everyone heard 3 shots from the back. Mary Ann Moorman and Jean Hill, who heard 4 or 5 shots, in which the witness statements denied this claim, and they said, again, 4 to 5 shots. So 4 shots prove the conspiracy, and finally 5 shots prove the conspiracy. So Newman's proved shots from rear and Zapruder film were faked. November 22nd, TV interview of Bill Newman states that 1 shot came from the back behind me, and 2, the first shot hit President Kennedy and he jumped in the seat of the limo. So here's the Newman interview if you want to view it later, and here's Will's testimony, of which the shots from the front limo she says in this video. So the photo has Lee Harvey Oswald in the doorway as JFK passes by. So this one picture proves that the Warren Commission had it wrong when they said these 3 things. That Lee Harvey Oswald was on the 6th floor, that he shot the President Kennedy, and that Lee Harvey Oswald was on the run and killed Officer Tippit. There was no reason to run in the first place for Oswald. So he could not go from the 6th floor to the 2nd floor, but could go from the ground floor to the 2nd. So shots from the front, right? The several police officers on the duty that day who immediately ran towards the knoll on hearing the gunshots as the president reported they were confronted by men, so purporting to be Secret Service agents. And Hoffman's testimony was ignored by the FBI investigators when he voluntarily came forward, but his account was verified by a railroad operator named Lee Bowers, who also observed the shooting from the grassy knoll from the vantage point of a control tower. So here's Chief of Police Jesse Curry's frontal shot of which he talks about, and also Acting Press Secretary Malcolm Kilduff at a news conference immediately after, in which Dr. Berkeley told me it is a simple matter of a bullet right through the head. And when he asked where the bullet entered his head, it says it's my understanding that it entered in the temple, the right temple, Your Honor. So LBJ and Hoover covered report cover-up. And also, Dallas County DA Henry Wade and Police Chief Jesse Curry answered press questions at 9:32, 11:23. So this is where the cover-up begins in plain sight, Your Honor. So 2 press conferences with as District Attorney Henry, right? Attorney Henry Wade faces the press in these 2 news conferences with President Kennedy. So the first conference took place shortly after Lee was fully charged with JFK's murder, and Oswald was formally charged at 11/26, 1963, and Wade's second news conference occurred in the evening of November after Oswald himself had been shot and killed by Jack Ruby. So the claim that we have here now is Oswald escaped by bus. According to the official story, Oswald leaves the TSB at 12:33, whereupon he walks several blocks and allegedly aboards the bus number 1213, driven by Cecil McWaters, at the corner of Elm and Murphy Streets after the bus, which was heading towards Dealey Plaza, becomes stuck in traffic. So Oswald allegedly departs the bus and walks over to the Greyhound bus station at the corner of Jackson and Lamar Streets, where he boards cab number 36, driven by William Whaley. At the time is now allegedly 12:48 in this narrative here, Your Honor. So Roger Craig actually remembers that there was a man standing on the steps of the book depository building, and he turned to me and said, "I'm with the Secret Service." So the man was about 40 years old, sandy-haired, with a distinct cleft in his chin, and he was well-dressed in a gray business suit. I was naive enough at the time to believe that the only police were actually officers after all, and this was the command post. I gave him the information. He showed little interest in the person's evening. However, he seemed extremely interested in the description of the rambler. So here, Craig may have had an encounter with a conspirator, and according to the warrant reports, he assigned the motorcade to that place in the hospital. So none stated the scene that there was the shooting. None of them stayed. So more of Craig. Fast forward several hours later, Craig heard an arrest being made in connection with the shooting of Officer J.D. Tippit. As he told the Warren Commission, "I kept thinking about the subject that had run and got in the car, so I called him Captain Fritz's office and talked to one of his officers and told him what I saw and gave him a description of the man." So the suspect, of course, was Lee Harvey Oswald in this case. So Mr. Craig, Captain Fritz, then asked him about he said, "What about the station wagon?" And the suspect interrupted him and said, "That station wagon belongs to Mrs. Payne. I believe that's what he said, and don't try to tie her into this. She had nothing to do with this." So here we go into the fourth point of error, Your Honor, in which Dr. Jerry Croft, PhD, did a statistical comparison of the cause of death of the witnesses connected with the JFK murder and the general population of the U.S. What he found was really stunning here, Your Honor. The cause of death by percentage of 78 people who were connected to the JFK assassination are as follows: 37% murder, 23% accidental death, 17% suicide, and 22% natural causes. Now, the cause of death of the general population in 1970 are as follows: murder, less than 1%, 9% accidental death, 1% suicide, and 89% natural causes. So Penn Jones we have these series of videos in which they have these very mysterious deaths, right? We even have these things about their mysterious deaths, in which Karen Kupcinet, TV's host daughter, who was overheard the telling of JFK's death prior to 11/23, the first person to die linked to the case was Karen Kupcinet. So in his book, Forgive My Grief, W. Penn Jones reports that a few days before the assassination, Karen Kupcinet, 23, was trying to place a long-distance telephone call from Los Angeles area. According to reports, the long-distance reporter heard Ms. Kupcinet scream into the telephone that President Kennedy was going to be killed. Karen's body was discovered on the 30th of November 1963, in which the police estimated that she had been dead for 2 days. The New York Times reported that she had been strangled. Her actor boyfriend, Andrew Prine, was the main suspect, but he was never charged with murder, and the crime remains unsolved. So we have very peculiar deaths going on here when they were connected to the case, Your Honor, in which even Grant Stockade had a very peculiar death, and he was a close friend of John F. Kennedy. And also Dorothy Killigan, and also Margaret Smith. Dorothy Kilgallen, a crime reporter of the New York Journal, obtained a private interview with Jack Ruby. She told friends that she had information that would break the case wide open. Aware of what had happened to Bill Hunter and Jim Cully, she handed her interview notes to her friend Margaret Smith. On 8th November 1965, Kilgallen was found dead. It was reported she had committed suicide, and her friend Margaret Smith died 2 days later. Very interesting what we have going on here. And Roger Craig, he was on duty in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. After hearing the firing of President John F. Kennedy, he ran towards the grassy knoll where he interviewed witnesses to the shooting. About 15 minutes later, he saw a man running from the back door of the Texas Book Depository down the slope on Elm Street. He then got into a Nash station wagon. Craig saw the man again in the office of Captain Will Fritz, and it was the recently arrested Lee Harvey Oswald. So when Craig told the story about a man being picked up by the station wagon, Oswald replied, "The station wagon belongs to Mrs. Payne. Don't try to tie her into this. She had nothing to do with it." That same quote shows up again, Your Honor, in which Craig was also same with Seymour Weitzman when the rifle was found on the 6th floor of the Texas Book Depository. He insisted that the rifle was a 7.65 Monster, not a Van Leeuwen not a man like Carcano. Roger, we keep continuing on with this testimony here, Your Honor, which in 1967, Roger G. Craig went to New Orleans and was a prosecution witness at the trial of Clay Shaw. Later that year, he was shot while walking to a car park. The bullet only grazed his head, but in 1973, a car forced Craig's car off the Mountain Road. So he was badly injured, but he survived the accident. In 1974, he was surviving another shooting in Waxahachie, Texas, in which the following year he was seriously wounded when his car engine exploded. Craig told his friends that the mafia had decided to kill him. Craig was found dead on 15th May 1975, and it was later decided that he had died as a result of self-inflicted gunshot wounds. So another one having a mysterious death, Your Honors. We keep continuing these series and streaks of mysterious deaths, and even we have a picture here, right? You can see obviously this was not Oswald in the picture at all. So all these things corroborate the statement that this was a conspiracy after all. And finally, on to the fifth point of error, in which the entire case falls apart against Oswald, Your Honor. So the murder of J.D. Tippit. We see that Myers reportedly omits important information that contradicts his conclusion in the first place. On several occasions, Myers buries important contrary information in his endnotes, which he surely knows most readers will not bother to study. So Myers repeatedly reaches conclusions that are contradicted by his own raw data. So Myers frequently relies on interview summaries, but he never mentions that numerous witnesses complained that those summaries were inaccurate and incomplete. And finally, Myers fails to mention that any witnesses changed their stories in the favor of the lone gunman incident scenario by the time they testified before the Warren Commission months after they give it the initial statements. So the Tippit murder, now we go on to that. J.D. Tippit was one of the few officers in Dallas police force who would not be called to Dealey Plaza to help investigate the assassination, of which my co-counsel will further address the Tippit murder, Your Honor. And also the problem Oswald was in the Texas theater. Now it comes to two wallets, right? So Bob Barrett claims that Captain W.R. Westbrook asked him about the names Oswald and Hill while he was thumbing through the IDs of a wallet he was holding at the Tippit scene. So interesting to note here, Your Honor, was that Captain Westbrook was in charge of hiring officers and had a desk job. However, on this day he was here at the Texas theater, and TSBD later goes to Vietnam and other things. Lee Harvey Oswald now has two identity, in which it's Lee Harvey Oswald on the left and Alex Hittle on the right. It's very suspicious having two wallets. So both wallets were found on the day, in which one was on Lee Harvey Oswald and one was at the Tippit murder scene. So do people carry two wallets with them when they commit crimes? Let's start asking questions here about the case in order to further crack this down. So would a person who just shot the president carry two wallets with him? It's very suspicious. So, but would they throw down the casings on the ground? Would they have even stayed in Dallas in the first place? And what is the chance of catching a person in 60 minutes after killing the president? If Oswald did not have two wallets, then this proves a conspiracy, which is government forged, Your Honor. So now we have these four questions to be answered. How does all of this take place? How does an unemployed worker shot the president, then escapes by bus in a cab to his rooming house? How does he pick up a pistol, kills Officer Tippit, but yet surrenders to the police in the theater? How does he die 2 days later by the hands of Jack Ruby? The last question is the best to conclude on, Your Honor, in which the man on the right above is FBI James Bookout. He is the one who got filmed. The man on the right is FBI James Bookout. He is the one who got filmed in the so-called live footage of Ruby shooting Oswald, so-called live footage of Ruby shooting Oswald. So we have very peculiar things going on here, Your Honors. But very little is what you have known before. Now we have these irrefutable facts I've shown you today. There's two Rubys, two directions of shots, two wallets, two political victims, and finally, two Oswalds. Now the final conclusion, or just one conclusion we have here, Your Honor, was that Lee Harvey Oswald was framed and was not guilty of killing President of the United States, JFK. Here is the closing statement I would like to bring now. The problems here are six in full. 1, the arrest was made before the evidence was obtained. 2, search warrants issued were based upon illegal information. 3, evidence planted the backyard photo. And 4, the shots came from many directions. 5, Oswald was placed at 12:30 in the doorway of the TSBD. And finally, 6, the Warren Commission assumed guilt. They did not prove it at all. So I would like to conclude on all these matters, Your Honor, in which if please overturn the court of public opinions, because Oswald is not guilty for any of these things, Your Honors. He was framed from the very start of there being conspiracy before the shooting ever happened in the first place. and there's still problems occurring today with this information that we have, Your Honor. So if there are no more further questions, I will let my co-counsel speak. Go to your slide. Gotcha. So it should be here in your drive.
Jack, I'm on the air. Can you?
All right. Just make sure to put it on the present mode.
Sure, you got it. You got it.
Good morning, and I will begin on the second speech, which is mostly going over the killing of Officer Tippit. I'll give it a second so that it can. Okay. So the Warren Commission has made 4 major flaws. 1, they stated that Oswald killed John F. Kennedy. 2, they stated that Oswald tried to flee the country. 3, Officer Tippit knew to go to Oswald's boarding house somehow. And 4, the Warren report cannot be correct unless Tippit was involved in the plot. Now, Oswald was not seen on the 6th floor of this picture, in which a witness took at around 12:25. Note that the witness was not standing directly in front of the 6th floor window. A was marked the spot of the 6th floor alleged sniper's nest. B marked the spot of the open window on the 5th floor. C, note that the President Kennedy's limo was about 7 or 8 minutes behind schedule and